So today we're going to begin a short discussion of mergers and how these mergers actually transpire in the market. Now, antitrust has become very popular in the 20th century, and due to several perhaps corrupt or unethical behaviors of companies, we've had the Federal Trade Commission complete focus on this type of behavior. One example that we saw from a recent YouTube video on Blackboard was this Archer Daniels Midland, better known as ADM example.
That this company and its competitors, who were only about 3 or 4 companies to start out with, decided to get together and say, listen, we're going to charge X amount of money for this particular additive to this food. These farmers are going to have to now pay higher prices, and we're making lots of profit. So as a result of that, this is kind of where antitrust has kind of gotten its strength, is that we want to discourage this kind of behavior. And we also want to begin to look at mergers and why companies tend to merge or not merge. So we find that its harmful effects of a merger may be that it concentrates the market. It makes it become more of a concentrated environment. So when this happens, what it means is that I've got a relatively large share of the market that only a few firms are holding. Now, the reason that we find that consumers tend to not like this behavior is that if there's only a few firms that are there, then it means that there's a possibility that prices are going to go up for consumers just in general. So what happens is that each merger that comes on or that is proposed to the Justice Department, it's analyzed, and we look at something that's known as the HHI index. So what this is a measure of the concentration. It's simply just the market share squared. So for example, if I've got one firm, let's call it firm A, and they have 50% of the market. So I'm going to take that 50% and I'm going to square it. About 2,500 there. So we've got firm B, and they have 20% of the market. Then you have a third one, firm C, that has 10% of the market. And then we say that of the rest of them, there is 20 other firms that each hold 1% of the market. So this would be, all other firms would be an HHI level of 20. So if I sum that up, I take the 2,500 plus the 400, the 100, and the 20, and I'm going to get an HHI of 320. So let's put that over there to the side so we know what we're talking about. So this is just a brief example of it. Now this level is a pretty high HHI level. This is telling me I've only got a few firms here that are controlling 80% of the market. So there's definitely monopoly power that is developed there. So this is kind of a discourage factor. You're not going to see firm A and firm B being allowed by the Justice Department to merge. So let's look at a couple other examples. We see Industry 1, whose HHI is 1,098. For the second industry, it is 940, and for the third, it's 3,292. So we can see for this third industry over here that this is very much a highly concentrated area. There's no way that you want the one big guy controlling any more of the market. So the Justice Department's going to say no to any merger that this guy proposes. Now we see that this is possible at Firm A under Industry 1, they've got 529. Firm B's got 324. So those two, if they were to merge, they would have a combined HH level of 853. So we have to ask ourselves, would that type of merger be permitted? Well, the Justice Department would look at it and they would have two challenges for it. They would say that if there is two firms that decide that they're going to merge, the post-merger must not exceed 1,800. So we meet that requirement under Industry 1. So let's go back. These two would only add up to be 853. The merger increases the index by more than 100 points. Well, it would for both of these, so it's possible that this merger would not be allowed. Now the thing with this is that this is also open-ended. We have to think about the fact of how hard is it to define a market structure to begin with. Now we think of this as being relatively easy, but with the invention of the internet, this has been extremely hard to define. And also for areas such as hospitals, this has been an extreme struggle to it. And in the 90s we saw quite a wave of hospital mergers. So we decided, well, is it having a post HHI level if a hospital in California merges with one in North Carolina? Because they're technically not quite the same merger. So what we find is that there tends to be extreme loopholes in the laws. So throughout the last few decades, well, the last 100 years really, we've seen a wave of mergers to where we've seen horizontal mergers in the beginning to where industries that were alike would merge. We've seen vertical mergers where the inputs of a particular final product were mergers. We've seen mergers where people were completely unrelated with one another. And more recently we've seen both horizontal mergers. Now, most likely the reason we've seen this happen is for something that we've talked about known as economies of scale. So I'm going to abbreviate economies there. To where, as we know, is that the greater and greater the output is, the less and less the cost on average. So the problems that we do find is that we find problems with this antitrust of that sometimes competition may not require a whole lot of firms. If I'm looking at cable, for example, my TV cable provider, two firms in the industry is quite competitive because they do tend to be natural monopolies, and by just allowing one other firm to enter the market, it gives something negotiation power on lower prices. We also see that oftentimes there's abuse of antitrust to maybe punish a competitor or for special interest groups to kind of go after a particular guy who may not be playing the game with them. We also find that international markets make huge barriers for antitrust law because it's hard to punish someone who's not in your own market due to different laws. And we've seen recently with bailing out troubled industries. For example, we saw that Wells Fargo has recently bought Wachovia. Now, how do we know that in 2 years that they're not going to both be extremely powerful banks? So we do see that there is problems with antitrust. However, what we have seen is that since the 1930s, we've seen that competition has risen greatly and that monopoly and monopoly power has been on the decline. So this is just a brief wrap-up of antitrust and how the Department of Justice looks into mergers and public policy.